Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here to listen to me today. And I'm sorry that I couldn't be with you today. I'm actually traveling in the DR Congo, which is why I was able, fortunately, to record this video despite not being there in person. So today I will be talking about and presenting a four-year research project called Driving Change, Putting Small-Scale Producers in the Driver's Seat of Battery Mineral Supply Regulation. So very much on topic for the theme today. So the first thing that I'll be doing is presenting the project, followed by the first step in the research, which is currently ongoing, and the steps that I'll be taking on my very upcoming trip to DRC, which is the implementation of the case study components. So this is a project, as I mentioned, that is a four-year project, which will last from 2022 to 2025. It's a project that is funded by the Flemish Research Foundation, the Research Foundation Flanders, and that is a project of the University of Antwerp, also in collaboration with CEGEMI, which is a research institute of l'Université Catholique de Bukavu, and l'Université de Lubumbashi is also involved in this project. So UNILU, which is the other partner in a different part of the country. So as we will be discussing, and as you will be discussing, the context is that increasingly companies must report on environmental, social, and human rights issues in their supply chains. This has led the EU, as well as several European countries as well, to adopt due diligence regulations at the national level. So for instance, France, Germany as well. And one thing that we noticed and which spurred this project is that there's been an incredible speed of developments in this space, and the rollout of this regulation and responses has occurred so quickly that there's really been no space for effective participation by communities and small-scale producers in the mineral supply chain in decision making. So that was really the motivation for this project. Its objectives are fourfold. So first is to map the most recent developments in transnational non-state mineral supply chain regulation. Secondly, to understand how small-scale producers participate in these regulatory initiatives, the extent to which they do or do not, and how. Thirdly, and importantly, to understand the social dynamics and local knowledges that surround these supply chains and that are not always sufficiently taken into account when it comes to these measures and this regulation. And fourthly, to propose pathways for how these small-scale producers can be put more in charge. So the research has already taken place to a small extent and will be rolled out to a far greater extent in the next couple of months. And this is in two regions of the Congo. So first is the province of South Kivu in the east. Well, I should say second, because that's where I'll be going to second, but that's where the research initially began. And then the two copper and cobalt producing provinces of Lualaba and Okatanga, as you can see there in the southeast. So South Kivu is much more in the 3T, so tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold. And then, as I mentioned, we have copper and cobalt in the southeast. So this is a project that will have both qualitative and quantitative methods, but for the moment, we're carrying out the qualitative component, which will be this year, 2023, and then the quantitative component, so a survey, is planned also for next year, 2024. And a key emphasis, obviously, with the focus on participation is also an emphasis on participatory research methods. And this begins, of course, with the working with a local research team, or several local research teams, actually, in partnership with CEGEMI and UNILU, which I mentioned. and who are the hosts of most of the research assistants that we will be working with, and who are our official partners on this project. And so we are really putting an emphasis on involving the small-scale producers themselves, the workers, and the communities more broadly. Because of the importance of digital technology, particularly blockchain, which has been used to do things such as trace supply chains and try to increase responsible sourcing, and has been increasingly adopted in global regulation, we will also focus on these digital components of the transnational non-state regulation that is unfolding in these areas. So the first step of the process has been, of course, to map the many recent developments in this transnational regulation. So for much of 2022, I, alongside a couple of PhD candidates and another PhD candidate acting as a consultant, have been working on mapping the current status of supply chain regulation initiatives, programs, and policies, which we knew in the beginning were many, but we didn't realize to what extent. So it was very important to conduct desk-based research and to work with the vast amount of available documentation and resources available. So currently that's taking place through literature research and coding. The coding is completed, and the process of writing and sharing the mapping report is underway. And based on this, we have been able to select several case studies, so specific projects and programs that we will use to start doing on-the-ground research in the DRC. So essentially, a bit of background about what's happening here. So there have been historically in the last several years, more around 2010, 2011, 2012, very big, very significant global concerns around so-called conflict minerals. So that included the 3 T's and gold. So these sorts of developments around mineral supply chains in Congo were really significant around this time, and it led to the implementation and development of multiple laws and directives. So that included the US legislation, the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010, or a specific section of the Dodd-Frank Act, I should say. The European Union regulation, which came out in 2021, but was several years in the making, and is similarly targeted at limiting the impact of these so-called conflict minerals. A lot of people observing noted that there were limited or even negative impacts of the Dodd-Frank Act, and so that has led to a really significant development. So not moving away from a search for cleaning up supply chains per se, but really a change of discourse. So what has been seen recently is that in the rush for sourcing cobalt for the green transition, there's really been a push for this cobalt to be responsibly sourced, so that the green transition doesn't contribute to suffering in areas where these minerals are mined. So more recently, and in 2016, this quite notable report came out called "This is What We Die For," subtitle "Human Rights Abuses in the Democratic Republic of Congo Power the Global Trade in Cobalt." And this came out when I was actually doing my PhD research in this area in the Southeast. And at the time, it didn't initially have an impact, or such an impact, but then as demand grew for cobalt and as attention began to be increasingly focused on cobalt, that's when it became very noticeable that people were starting to take note, and this was starting to attract attention. There was a follow-up and monitoring report in 2017 as well on different companies' responses to these accusations about problematic cobalt in their supply chains. So Amnesty and AfroWatch pointed specifically to, for instance, child labor, frequent accidents in underground tunnels, prolonged exposure to cobalt with health consequences, little or no personal equipment. So again, vulnerability to accidents, to health consequences as a result of mineral exposure. And so this report really pointed in the direction of major international buyers of these minerals, including technology and vehicle companies, of course, as mentioned. So I already mentioned Dodd-Frank and the EU regulation, but there've really been a growth in the number of international regulatory frameworks that should be pointed out. So the OECD has its due diligence guidance for responsible supply chains of minerals. The London Bullion Market Association has responsible gold guidance. The International Council of Metals and Minerals has a guide to responsible sourcing. And what has really mushroomed is the number of multilateral and multi-stakeholder regulatory frameworks and initiatives. So the Global Battery Alliance, for instance, has developed a Cobalt Action Partnership, which is working on the development of a framework specifically for artisanal and small-scale mining. So we can see that the focus is really on ASM itself and the hand mining of cobalt using basic equipment. There's also the Responsible Minerals Initiative, the Responsible Cobalt Initiative, which is much more an initiative of Chinese corporate actors. Fair Cobalt Alliance, Better Mining, which is a monitoring scheme. So I'll try not to swamp you with acronyms, but really the key point is just to see how much of this is taking place and how much development of this regulatory infrastructure has occurred in the past few years. That's followed with, responsible sourcing or responsible procurement standards, certification schemes. So schemes that purport to certify certain mineral supplies as responsibly sourced, standards that corporate actors are meant to comply with. As I mentioned, the EU regulation on conflict minerals. The EU will also implement human rights due diligence legislation, which is in the works. The International Conference on the Great Lakes region in Africa has its regional certification mechanism, which is also implemented in the DRC as part of its national legislation. So as mentioned, the Congolese mining code is also relevant. The DRC is creating new institutions, notably the L'Entreprise Générale du Cobalt, which is supposed to be a responsible buyer of all the artisanally mined cobalt in the country. And then, much even closer to the ground, so even closer to the upstream part of the supply chain, there's just really a proliferation of sometimes short-term, sometimes longer-term programs and projects that really seek to either offer traceability and assurance to those who buy from actors from countries like the DRC, or initiatives that are more pilot projects trying to work with artisanal miners and cooperatives. In some cases, there's focus on monitoring of supply chains and reporting of abuses and incidents that occur. And so it's really quite an elaborate architecture, as mentioned, and something that can be a bit challenging to make sense of. So that is really what we've been working on this year, and the working paper should be completed in the next few months. So hopefully that's something that we can also gain feedback on, and can be something that's very useful as well as for those interested in these developments, as for sharing information and carrying out outreach in the DRC itself on this really astonishing range of actors and initiatives, so that the small-scale producers themselves, of course, can have a better grasp on what is taking place in and around their supply chains. So then based on this, as mentioned, we've chosen some case studies. So Kufatilia is a case study that uses technology to encourage active participation in monitoring, and it involves a reporting and follow-up of incidents with the involvement of NGOs and local associations. So then the question becomes, well, to what extent is this participatory? Does it live up to its promise? And so that's the research that we'll be undertaking in the next step. where in 2023, 2 teams of 2 researchers in Eastern DRC, but then 3 teams of 2 in the Lualaba province and Okatanga province will be doing similar research at multiple sites for these different initiatives. And that will be our next step in really understanding the developments on the grounds and how small-scale producers are experiencing these many changes and developments as they try to earn a living in a fast-moving environment. So please do not hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions about the project or how we plan to take it forward in the next few years. Thank you and enjoy the workshop.